Welcome to the Crypto and Blockchain Talk.
Hello.
Hey.
Guten Tag.
Aloha.
Hola. Shalom.
Hello.
Namaste.
Ni hao.
Privet.
Hello.
Salut. Yassas.
Salve.
Ciao.
Bonjour. Our podcast talks about the latest trends in the worlds of cryptocurrencies and the blockchain.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Crypto and Blockchain Talk. And as per usual, with me is my muse. His name is Mr. Ben Jessel from Forbes.com. Ben, how are you?
I am great. I love the idea about being amused. I'm down.
Well, you not only are my muse, I find you amusing.
Boom.
That's so bad. But I'm leaving it in there. Anyway, this week I thought what we would do is just have a little look around the world at what's happening in terms of legislation and other ridiculous stories that I found, and just thought maybe we would have some comments on them. So anyone listening to the show knows that I have a keen interest in what happens in Estonia, and it so happens that they have this e-residency program. Estonia's had an e-residency program for a very, very long time, and it was quite highly coveted. And it was quite interesting because many times we noticed that companies who looked very scammy were saying that they were based in Estonia. And as you know, we're very interested in scams on Crypto and Blockchain Talk. We like to talk about them, analyze them, warn all of our listeners about not investing in them, or, just give them as much of a heads up that they need to do more research. So it's quite interesting because I read a headline the other day and I did a double take and I went, how come I'm so good at guessing, Ben, what's going to happen? Because the headline was, crypto scammers plague Estonia's e-residency program. Did you know about this?
I did not. That's a pity. Estonia was so on the front foot of blockchain. It's sad to hear that these organizations are using it for that purpose.
Oh my God, but it's so expected. Let me tell you something. Every piece of scum from all over the universe and beyond, even people from the Andromeda galaxy, were coming to Estonia because it's such an open place. They were basically saying, okay, yeah, come here, register your firm. It was giving an air of legitimacy as well because, Estonia is quite respected. They are the center for cybersecurity endeavors on behalf of the EU. They are one of the first nations, if not the first nation rather, in the world to really embed blockchain into their society as a whole. The Financial Intelligence Unit in Estonia discovered that many overseas companies have been involved in massive exit scams. Basically, just scamming the hell out of people who have lost their shirts and a lot more. It's really quite sad because it was just so obvious. I don't think, in my opinion, that they really did enough due diligence themselves, authorities that be that in Estonia that check off these companies. All they had to do was look at some websites and they would have seen themselves that a lot of the things they approved were scams. It's really done a lot of damage to their e-residency program. What do you think the next thing Estonia should be?
It's interesting to see that a lot of these enclaves, they're set up for a good reason, which is to try and attract trade, try and attract a lot of time through kind of providing an easier, lighter regulated place for blockchain and Bitcoin companies to do business. It's interesting to see what tends to then happen, by opening up the doors, you get both the good and the bad, right? You get all the good in terms of entrepreneurship, but inevitably you're going to get some of the bad. I think a country like, Estonia, who's had to kind of live through, the Cold War and, it has to rebuild itself and, it needs to have a place in the new economy. How you do that in a way where you're protecting against the corrupting effect that some of this money and activities is going to have while bringing money into the coffers. I think an interesting poster child is Malta. Malta has been stricken with corruption and scandal, a country that was providing a light touch approach to crypto to make it a friendly and attractive place.
Yeah.
So they could grow this as, their new digital economy. And Malta has suffered some significant corruption issues associated with a lot of these blockchain companies. 70% of the firms that once went to Malta have now disappeared and left the country. The inference being because of the corruption scandals and allegations, which apparently went all the way up to the top government as well.
Yeah. Going from one island to another and talking about hiding money, which, I don't know, that can apply to every country where there's a bank. But the EU has decided to remove the Cayman Islands from their blacklist of tax haven. And the Cayman Islands has been a very popular hideout for people of not so good reputations. People normally go to the Cayman Islands to incorporate companies which are very dubious, at least in my opinion. Yes, I think they do some tax incentives to draw companies there, but, it's a very popular place for crypto businesses. I'm sure you can imagine. I think there's been more than one crypto scam that's come out of the Cayman Islands. But yeah, as of late, it's now been removed from the blacklist of tax havens.
That is interesting because it's hard to tell because it's so murky, but people guess there's about $21 trillion sitting offshore in that tiny island, of which US companies may be responsible for 10% of that, 2.1 trillion. There's over 100,000 companies registered in the Cayman Islands, and, believe me, it's not a big place. So, it's most certainly, a tax haven. I do wonder why these changes have been made. I wonder if it's political. I mean, certainly the loopholes have been tightened around, moving money around the world, and particularly in the US. Even with shell companies these days, government has really clamped down on who the underlying beneficial owner is of a shell company, which has taken a lot of those schemes used offshore and then made them a lot more difficult to do. But, as the Panama Papers showed us, there are still many, many companies and individuals that are using these tax shelters and various kind of funds as loopholes to do that. Cayman Islands, I guess, doesn't have a problem that Malta or Estonia is going to have. That insidiousness doesn't rise. It doesn't affect the country. It's very much just this money goes into these bank accounts, and we don't ask any questions, and we don't tax you.
I'm just wondering which politician now has some investment going on in the Cayman Islands, because it makes absolutely no sense. There are so many scams that have come out of the Caymans. It's redonkulous. But you know what? It is what it is, and let's see how this goes. I don't even know what to say to that, but if we're going to talk about ridiculous, maybe, I just have to tell you, it does go into the world news spectrum of what we're talking about with crypto. But what about the arrest of John McAfee in Spain? He's been charged with evading taxes after failing to disclose millions that he's earned in promoting crypto. Basically, it's tax evasion, but he's being nailed also because they know he's hiding crypto with obviously not disclosing the compensation that he's had from promoting a lot of these crypto companies. He's made quite a bit of money, and this is the thing. In his own words, McAfee said that he's made more than 23 million US dollars from promoting crypto companies. And some of the recommendations he was making were less than legit. So
John is something of a maverick, isn't he?
Yeah.
He was running for president at one point, or certainly that was his kind of joke campaign. He certainly had a colourful life ever since he founded and sold, his antivirus software. And, then he's been on the run from the US authorities as well. And it's been interesting because he's been hopping from place to place. But you're right, he had a spell where he had a number of companies that were quite unsuccessful. He had a number of attempts to launch various kind of companies or invest in various companies that really didn't have much there, but then he could have promoted them to be a lot more, and they weren't successful. And then he kind of started getting into kind of crypto and trying to shill cryptocurrencies. I believe he even set up his own an exchange at one point as well. But there's a couple of people who've fallen afoul of promoting cryptocurrencies. I forget the name of one of the famous people who had.
Floyd Mayweather.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's one of many. many. There's a DJ Khaled, a bunch of other people have been slapped on the wrist.
If you promote securities to investors publicly, they're going to get into trouble. Of course, back in those days, most people didn't realize that these were securities. I do wonder if all these ICOs had actually been successful and people had made money out of them, whether we'd be having this conversation. If the authorities would have turned a blind eye, if it's only because, that people lost a lot of money. So John McAfee is certainly someone with a checkered history, a very colourful history, and certainly my view is there's no smoke without fire here.
No.
He's had a lot of run-ins. I'm surprised that they hadn't caught him until now, to be honest.
Well, I think that they've tried. It's just now they were successful because he was hiding out in international waters at one point on a yacht. On the other side of the coin, a Malaysian billionaire has stepped down from running his companies to pursue his horse cryptocurrency. He said, "I'm handing over the public listed company's business to the new directors as he concentrates on cryptocurrencies." And by the way, he's 65 years old. So he's about 30 and a bit years older than the average crypto enthusiast. It's just amazing, actually, that he is so into this. He believes in this so much. And the guy's a billionaire. And he didn't make his billions, apparently, from inheritance. He's built his companies up from scratch. So he must see something good in the cryptosphere, which I congratulate him for. Have you heard about this? And what do you think about billionaire leaving his business to pursue crypto?
I have not heard about this at all. You're going to have to fill me in on this one.
Okay, so the guy's name is Lee Kim Yew, and he's the founder of a Malaysian company. It's an investment giant called Country Heights. And he explained that he was going to have this horse currency. The reason why he's named it the horse cryptocurrency is because he has subsidiaries within his portfolio of holdings, which is a luxury resort called the Palace of the Golden Horses, another which is a health sanctuary called the Golden Horses. So he's only taken the name of the horse because it falls in line with his stable of other products, his portfolio. He's going into it full speed ahead. It's going to probably make everyone in Malaysia, first of all, wake up and say, what is this cryptocurrency stuff? It will actually give, I think, a lease of life to cryptocurrencies in Malaysia, to those people who never even heard of it or knew about its existence. And I also think it's going to make people who helped Lee Kim Yew become a billionaire in the first place, they'll obviously invest in his horse currency. He's got these established listed companies. So he's really giving a very good pedigree already to a cryptocurrency which doesn't even look like it's been issued yet.
Yeah, it seems to be a asset-based cryptocurrency, which is interesting because you wonder what the assets are going to be. Is it going to be assets within this organization? I always kind of wonder whether these asset-backed, cryptos. I mean, I get the concept. Cryptocurrency is a bit like, the dollar used to be on the gold standard, so you knew that gold was worth something, whatever the equivalent in gold was. The piece that I've never been that comfortable with is, back in the day, you could trade in your dollar bill for a piece of gold.
Yeah.
These asset-based currencies, you can't trade in. If you have like aluminum, coin, which is, worth a piece of aluminum, you can't trade that in for a piece of aluminum. All you have is that good feeling that, there is a company that at least has those reserves as an equivalent. But that's why I can never understand. There's nothing in that contract of the coin that says this is absolutely worth this, or you can trade this in for this, or, if there's a run on the currency, we will absolutely liquidate the aluminum that we have to buy up the currency to match this. That's kind of why I'm always a little kind of cynical of these asset-backed tokens,
Right.
Just because they should be worth something because there is something that's pegged to doesn't necessarily mean it will be.
So according to press releases, Lee is proposing to issue 1 billion units of his horse currency backed by $500 million worth of the company's assets, with an initial 300 million units open for circulation to the public. And meanwhile, these assets are going to be placed in a trust held by a reputable legal firm. So it looks interesting, doesn't it? But, anyone who's out there and thinking about investing in this, it doesn't matter who this man is, and it doesn't matter about what his companies are. You still have to do your research. You still have to do your due diligence, because it really doesn't mean anything until you do that before you make any kind of investment. Isn't that right, Ben?
Always do your research.
Always do your research. Never invest in anything until you fully understand what you're investing in, number one. and never invest more than you can afford to lose. That's number 2. I want to say one thing before we go over to the next topic, and that's a quote by his company saying, "The founder is so confident that Country Heights can be the first company to turn something which is not so credible into something that is credible." So even his own company acknowledged that cryptocurrency is tinged with something that's not so palatable.
Not so palatable. That's interesting.
Yeah, so, they're admitting that they know that crypto doesn't have the greatest of reputations, but they believe they can turn that around, and I congratulate them for that.
I wonder why he's doing this.
I don't know.
I mean, there is certainly an area of cryptocurrency that truly is trying to solve some of the problems of the underbanked and those that are marginalized in society from participating.
Yeah.
Stellar has always had that as their overall motto. It's to help, people in Argentina or Venezuela who are concerned that whatever they're going to get paid is going to dwindle to nothing because of inflation. And other oppressive regimes that have currency controls, or people that can't even go to a bank or maybe not even have their documentation. So I get all that. And Malaysia certainly is, a very large country, which does have sort of, a lot of poverty in it. So if this is done right, I could see that it could work. But how often have these cryptocurrency initiatives ever really worked out, especially when they've been backed by, some eccentric billionaire? It tends to fail, but maybe this will be different.
Yeah, who knows? But we've already given a warning to all of our listeners to make sure you do your homework. So right across the border in Thailand, the central bank there has just issued $1.6 billion in government bonds on the IBM blockchain. Isn't that interesting?
It's very interesting. It's certainly interesting to see governments and banks beginning to use private and permission blockchains as a ledger for being able to record instruments. It's a great use case, because there's just so many. If you look at any of these debt instruments or structured products, there's a lot of complication. Certainly corporate lending, it still involves a fax machine in many areas. It's terrifying to think even now. Just getting this stuff off paper is a huge opportunity here. I remember the World Bank did something quite recently when they actually issued a bond using Ethereum blockchain. And they were saying that just the issuance and the servicing costs were so small in comparison to traditional ways of doing it. So there's certainly a very tangible use case here for using private blockchains for raising debt.
Apparently, within 2 weeks of this launch, the central bank sold more than $1.6 billion, $1.6 billion US dollars worth of savings bonds. And by the way, this is a world's first. This is a world's first blockchain-based government savings bond issuance platform. And what it's actually done, this platform, is reduce the bond issuance time from 15 days to 2 days. So this increased efficiency of the process is reducing operational costs and also getting rid of all of the redundant validation of all the documents which are involved within the bond issuance. So it's not just cutting down, it's basically an efficiency saver in every shape and form in terms of human interaction and cost.
That's a huge takeout. And if you think about banks at the moment, banks or even governments, they're under just unprecedented pressure right now.
Yeah.
There's just while the savings rates of many countries have skyrocketed, I believe, we're up to about 20% saving rate here in the US now. There's a lot of money awash in all these banks, but there's nowhere to lend it to.
Yeah.
Because interest rates are so low. So banks can't make any money out of the money they got sitting in their accounts. And that's a problem. If you look at retail banks, they lose $400 for every customer they have who doesn't take out some form of credit or lending or debt product. If they just purely put their money in the bank, they lose money. So if you think about it from that context, these banks have got to slash their operating costs by up to a third in the next few years, owing to the pandemic and, some of these forces here. And how are they going to do it? Well, they're going to do it by having to get a lot more efficient, which means taking bold steps such as digitizing their loans, putting them on blockchain, and then rationalizing a lot of the administration around servicing those loans.
Banks have to have a better plan going forward. The world is in such a weird place, as we all know, and I don't need to go into that. And now that there is so many more competing products and services which have nothing to do with traditional banking, more to do with crypto and alternative banking solutions, that you're right, if they don't start looking at using the blockchain in terms of saving, using the smart contract side and the other pieces which make the use of blockchain an obvious tool to help them slash their costs, well, they're ignoring the obvious. And that's on top of the security elements, which would give another needed benefit to many of these banks.
Yeah, and I think we'll see a lot more of this beginning to happen. I mean, I remember being involved in a derivatives project where, quite amazing, you think these banks, when you're looking at investment banks, are well-oiled machines, but far from it. I remember sitting around a table with some of the largest banks in Wall Street for a project we were doing in derivatives. They would do a deal where they would agree to buy, equities or stocks at a certain price, and then for a year they'd come back and say, okay, this is how much we think that you owe us the money. And the other bank would come back and say, no, we think that you owe us money. And, it'd be little things like, they'd be using different calendars, they'd be using different sources, there'd be including after hours pricing versus, end of trading day. They'd be using different interest rate sources, little things like that because it's not fully standardized, you get these huge differences at the end. And imagine, you think you owe $200 million and actually you find out that you owe $100 million. That has repercussions everywhere because you've suddenly got to find this money, which means pulling out money from places that you hadn't invested. It becomes a real challenge. So that's happening day after day after day across all of these banks around the world. And it's not just derivatives, it's lending, it's all other kinds of operations, all because you think that you have the right version of the transaction you've done, and someone else, the second you press go, has a completely different understanding of that. I think that blockchain has huge opportunity there. Trade finance is a particularly big area where a lot of organizations are looking to use blockchain solutions to take all of the information they have about cargo moving around the world and putting it in a single place that everyone can see. I mean, that's a great example of an industry where everything moves in a sequential way. You can imagine you're going to make product, so you get a loan. You then put that product on a truck. You have to show the documentation. It all gets ticked off. That truck then goes to a ferry terminal. Then it gets inventoried and ticked off. And each time, someone has to tell a bank, yes, it was okay, or tell the receiver that's okay. And then only once it gets off the ferry or off the shipping container can you actually have your money released. But each time, you've got someone with a clipboard ticking things off, faxing it to a bank or faxing it to the buyer or the seller. And it's incredibly time-consuming and very inefficient. This way, you can track in real time where your goods are. You can have this electronic view of goods. Any disputes can quickly be resolved. And the other problem as well is that a lot of these smaller organizations aren't necessarily known when, the shipping container comes into a port. You have these issues around KYC or identification of particular organizations. You have banks that don't want to do business with some of these small organizations never heard before. And as you start exposing all of this data and providing transparency, it means it's a lot easier to write loans for some of these smaller organizations that want to do business and transport goods around the world.
Anything to do with supply chain or tracing of assets of any kind, tracing money, well, there is no better way than blockchain. There just isn't. Thai Central Bank has been actively involved in using the blockchain within their business. And it's not even just the blockchain, because in June, the Thai Central Bank also launched a pilot test for their own central bank digital currency, the digital bond. And they're testing it with large-scale enterprises, apparently. And they are planning to use their digital currency to transact with Hong Kong's monetary authority. Yeah, so they're looking to use this right now, within the next month, to transact with Hong Kong's monetary authority. So they're looking to actually make their first transactions no longer a pilot test, with Hong Kong. So it looks like they're kind of in the same way as China. They're moving towards this way of their national central bank creating a national cryptocurrency for use in transactions, in real transactions. I think it's quite exciting, and I think it's a big thumbs up to Thailand. Well done to you for doing all this.
It's interesting to see all these developments happening. I mean, some come in kind of fits and starts. You know, I think kind of what Maersk has done with Trade Lens is an interesting example. That was a project that initially started off slow because of some issues around intellectual property. So, you know, that's now some strength, and that continues to be moving forward. And Maersk is, you know, the biggest shipping organization in the world. When organizations throw their weight behind these things, you know, they do take off, but they do take a while because, you know, we are breaking new territory here. I mean, organizations weren't designed to be decentralized or to share information in such a transparent way. And standardization has always been the challenge between organizations, and that takes time because there are compromises ultimately as you start to share and standardize information and processes. So when we do see these things, I think what is unsaid here is just the sheer amount of effort that it takes to get to this point, you know? I think one criticism of blockchain, even those that have been in there for a while, you know, have leveled at it, is that it's taken far too long. It's been a lot slower than anyone thought. I think the counter argument to that is it's a little bit different from something like the internet. You know, the internet kind of came along. There was no expectations around it. No one even knew what it was. Started to encroach into our workplace and our home, and then empowered experiences, and then people saw the opportunities of it and started to kind of use it. Whereas blockchain requires a fundamental change to how organizations work together, how they share with each other, and how they have a model where their processes interlock together, data does. So you're asking organizations to adopt a new technology and completely change the way that they work together in order to try and move something forward. So anytime you see these blockchain initiatives beginning to reach fruition, all of that effort has been put into it to move it to that point, which is, you know, far greater than, you know, I think just even, you know, the introduction of the internet has been, you know, when you look at it at that level.
It's just another game changer in terms of technology and in currency. But going over, talking about game changers, some people don't want a game changer because the Australian Central Bank said that they saw no public policy case for a central bank digital currency. They basically said, we don't see any need or any use for this. So it's a complete 180 from China and Thailand and many other countries who we know, including the EU and the United States, were looking at the digital dollar and the digital euro because the Reserve Bank of Australia said absolutely they don't see this case for a central bank cryptocurrency. It's quite interesting how all these countries are taking their different stances. And of course, China is rolling along with what they are doing. They're the furthest along, in my opinion. China's already in the midst of completing their tests, and they're determined that their digital yuan is going to be up and running in time for their Winter Olympics in 2022. They are gonna make it happen, folks. So it's quite interesting what's going on in Australia as opposed to Thailand.
That's two very different attempts, isn't it? And I think what is interesting is that each of these countries do have slightly different objectives of what they're trying to do. You know, for China, there's certainly a lot more of that control aspect. If you can control the currency, then it's harder for people to be involved in nefarious activities and harder for money to be used in the grey market. So, there's also in China you can do that because there's much an understanding that the government will play that role in your life. Obviously that's unacceptable in somewhere like US, which is a lot more about freedom. Now in Europe and the US, the focus is a lot more being about how you can optimize and grease the wheels of investment banking and capital markets by having the ability to trade and settle securities more quickly, and by doing so take out risk, which means that banks then have to have a lot more money sitting on the side in case banks fail. So they're approaching a lot more from the perspective of the last financial crisis when the whole system seized up, and arguably wouldn't have done if you had central bank digital currency where you could tell where all your money was and who owed what to whom on point, and you could do some direct open market operations. The government could step in a lot more of a meaningful kind of way. So I think there's some different approaches for kind of different reasons. I think India is interesting. I mean, they've actually, they're interested in retail CBDC because they think they're a high cost and then printing distributed in distributing physical currency. So they're actually going for a cost reduction purely, with the populace, which, given it's a vast country with a very populous country, that makes sense because the amount of banknotes they have to have in circulation.
It's an obvious use case there, and plus they have a very high number of cell phone users in that country as well, because don't forget, if you're going to have a cryptocurrency, you do have to have, even if the population is great, you still have to have internet access. You have to have a phone on you, a device. Yes, of course, you can have a computer as well, but that's not fit for travel. So you really have to have a phone, which is a smartphone, which is internet ready in order to use it. So it does, as long as they have the connectivity and the access, then it's an obvious solution for highly populated, or any country really, regardless of population. You just have to be sure that you've got the network in both smartphone and internet access working. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for people. And that actually is another topic we're going to take up on another podcast one day, technology and keeping up with crypto. So I'm not going to ruin that one. But what I think I want to do is I want to end up talking about Russia. And now, apparently, in Russia, unqualified investors can buy up to $8,000 of crypto. So this is what the Bank of Russia is saying. So Russia's central bank wants to limit the amount of cryptocurrency which can be acquired by non-professional investors. So what do you think about that?
But that's interesting because I think Russia had even banned crypto for a while. So I guess kind of for Russia, there's a couple of things going on. They do have a command and control kind of society, similar to China, so far as it's very hegemonic, society. And so that means they can do a lot more. And the populace will accept a lot more. Also, crypto is a primary vehicle for how money laundering happens. And, Russia is a country where there is a lot of money laundering that occurs because of the oligarchs and because of this kind of black economy that exists and so prevalent in Russia. So I wonder if there's an attempt to really try and control the oligarchs and the black economy, which is such a large facet of the Russians' economy.
So it was only relatively recently, it was earlier on in this year, where Russia finally passed their crypto bill. And that is something which they are still working on, from what I can see. This new law is not going to come into effect until January 1st of 2021. It's going to hit people in Russia. I think in some instances, those people who are into cryptocurrency, it's obviously going to impact them greatly, because that's not a lot of money. And by the way, it's the equivalent of 600,000 rubles. So it's, for somebody who wants to invest as a private investor, it's a very small cap. It's not even one Bitcoin.
No, that is interesting. I'm aware of a statistic that the estimate for the size of the shadow economy in Russia is something between 20 to 40% of the Russian economy.
Yeah.
So that at the lower end could be nearly $2 trillion. So, based on that, it's kind of understandable that they'd want to crack down on the crypto, because that is going to be one of the primary vehicles for how, not really the primary, but a growing vehicle for how that black economy can happen. So, maybe the Russian authorities are looking at, what's happened in the US, where, the US was slow to react. We had a whole ICO boom and bust. We had to put KYC in and controls. We had to convict BitMEX and things of that kind of nature. And maybe they looked at that and thought, maybe we don't have the time and the resources to do all of that. Maybe we should just make a blanket ban now and just be done with it, in terms of the limits that you're saying. Maybe they may open it up a little later over time. Certainly that's going to, affect a lot of investors that are seriously about cryptocurrency. But maybe they don't care. Maybe they think it's such a small asset class that it doesn't matter in terms of, the populace who want to get involved for non-nefarious activities, and at the same token, they're too worried about it becoming a vehicle for the black economy.
Well, we will have to see what happens with Russia if they do change their mind and increase the amount that people can invest with. I'd like to thank you, Ben, so much for joining us on this world roundup of what's happening in crypto in countries around the world.
Aviva, it's been fun, entertaining, and informative as usual.
And I hope it is for all of our listeners as well. I'd like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in to this week's Crypto and Blockchain Talk. Please remember to tell your friends and family to tune in to us on their favorite podcasting platforms. We would love to hear from you, so if you have anything you would like to communicate with us, which is exploring topics, or you have any recommendations, please email us directly at education@savvydigital. That's education@savvy, S-A-V-I-I digital.com. We would love to hear from you. Remember, all of these podcasts are streamed on our sister radio station, Crypto 24 Radio, which is on 24/7 playing news, little tidbits, interviews, and lots of music. Also, don't forget that we have a website with all the latest breaking news, which is www.cryptofinance24.com. Again, thank you for tuning in. We know that when you tune into us, you're taking valuable time out of your day. So thanks again, take care, and goodbye.